In a statement released on Tuesday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi slammed Washington, claiming that its betrayal of China on the Taiwan issue is bankrupting its national reputation. Both the U.S. and China have increased military activity in the area in preparation for the visit. Just minutes after Pelosi's arrival in Taipei, China's Eastern Theater Command launched joint air and sea operations in all directions around Taiwan. It's still unclear how a crisis would develop, but it wouldn't be very unusual. After comparable events in 1954, 1958, and the middle of the 1990s, it would actually be the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. Beijing attempted to prevent the Eisenhower administration from signing a mutual defense treaty with Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Nationalist Party, who had fled to Taiwan in 1949 after losing a civil war to Mao Zedong's Communists, in the first conflict, which took place shortly after the end of the Korean War. The Defense Pact was signed by the U.S. and Taiwan in 1954. Meanwhile, China pounded the Taiwanese-controlled islands of Kinmen and Matsu with artillery while the U.S. attempted to prevent Communist forces from capturing them. They also sought to prevent Chiang Kai-shek from launching a counterattack in an effort to regain the mainland, according to Chang. In 1958, the islands were shelled more often due to a second conflict. President Dwight Eisenhower rejected the proposal of using nuclear weapons against China to stop the mainland from annexing the Taiwan-controlled islands of Kinmen and Matsu. Eventually, a tense standoff developed between the two, during which Communists and Nationalists traded days of artillery fire. This face-saving routine persisted sporadically for about 20 years. The alternate day bombardment was a propaganda tactic, according to the then Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, that was psychological and intended to create the impression they, China, are the masters. The third crisis started in 1995 when Taiwanese President Lee Teng-hui visited Cornell University, his alma mater. Initially opposed to the plan, the Clinton administration was compelled to change its mind after a congressional resolution in favor of the trip. In retaliation, China conducted many military drills over several months, including firing missiles into the waters near Taiwan and practicing amphibious invasions on the island. Lee's trip to the U.S. was viewed in Beijing as another breach of Washington's adherence to the One China policy. Similar to this, Qi Lei, a Taipei-based military commentator and author of a book on the Third Taiwan Strait crisis, claims that Beijing believes the United States is gradually weakening the One China policy and is attempting to draw a line in the sand to deter Washington regarding Pelosi's current visit to Taiwan. Beijing's military showdowns were also intended to dissuade Taiwanese citizens from supporting Lee during the 1996 presidential elections. The plan failed. 2 carrier combat groups were dispatched by the U.S. to the waters close to Taiwan. In Taiwan's first ever direct presidential elections, people chose Lee with a 54% majority. According to Susan Shirk, who later served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs, the two sides, I think, were profoundly chastened and sobered by how near they were to a big military clash. After that, both sides really worked hard to lay a foundation beneath the relationship to keep that from happening again. If China hadn't de-escalated, if they had responded by, example, striking or harassing the carrier battle group, that would have been very hazardous, says Shirk, the author of Overreach on U.S.-China relations. With the end, relations between the U.S. and China were restored, culminating in Jiang Zemin, the then president of China, visiting the United States in 1997. But there was a big chance that the U.S., China, and Taiwan would get into a fight. Relations between Washington and Beijing are far more tense now than they were in 1996, 25 years later, as the U.S. and China are at odds once more on Taiwan. Michael Swain, director of the East Asia program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, claims that the two sides are engaging in a mutually reinforcing dynamic in which they tend to believe the worst about one another. It is a kind of strategic rivalry that can easily get out of hand. Chong adds that the ruler of China is still another difference this time. The goal of Xi Jinping, according to him, is to bring about the rejuvenation of the Chinese country, which includes reunification with Taiwan. Xi is more personally invested than his predecessors in Taiwan policy. Therefore, everything that isn't going the way he wants it to could have an impact on his reputation, if not his status, Chong claims. And Xi is in charge of a military that is more stronger than China's was during any of the previous crises. 3 aircraft carriers are included. It's difficult to say whether China would use them given that numerous American warships are already circling the area. According to analysts, Beijing is attempting to project military power while still preventing military escalation. According to Wen T-sung, a political science professor at the Australian National University, if China lets Pelosi happen and does nothing, China risks looking weak. But at the same time, Xi really needs stability right now, so he doesn't really have the option of starting a war because a war would be the biggest risk to stability. He appears to be in a catch-22 situation. And if anyone has learned from previous crises in the Taiwan Strait, it is the Taiwanese people, who seem fairly nonplussed by the most recent hostility, according to Chong. Therefore, Beijing must keep stepping up its threat every time, until it has to really carry out that threat, or have its bluff called, according to Chong, if Beijing wants to send a message to an island that is becoming less susceptible to coercion.